Chapter 6. For 2 days after her father's death, hundreds of enormous dragonflies blanketed Jenna's front yard. No one knew where they came from or why they darted about haphazardly, barely 2 feet above the ground, with their iridescent wings, their blue-green bodies, shimmering in the sunlight. Like miniature aircraft with defective gyroscopes, they shot out in all directions, coming within a fraction of an inch of colliding with each other. Neighbors who never went for walks and had little interest in a physical fitness suddenly took leisurely strolls along the sidewalk, slowing their pace to a virtual standstill as they approached the Ward house. They did not know what to make of the strange sight, so they simply shook their heads and called it a sign. But of what? They had no idea. All this time, Jenna hardly noticed the dragonflies or the curious neighbors. At night, she sometimes slept curled on the wicker chase lounge on the front porch because the air conditioning in the house numbed the tips of her fingers and toes. On those nights, cicadas hummed their own deep, mysterious song, while a mournful owl in a nearby oak tree wailed the chorus. And in the morning, the pillow would be wet with tears Jenna had cried in her sleep. Something else came with the night, a disturbing dream. A dream choked with thick, twisted tree trunks, big enough to hide a bear, and tangled vines that coiled around her body, pulling her deeper and deeper into a mist-clouded forest. Through the vapor, Jenna could make out the bare-boned white branches of a giant tree, and as the vines pulled at her ankles, she tugged against them with all her strength. She would not go to this place. Nothing, not all the vines on the face of the earth, could make her go there. In daylight, the dream made no sense. Whenever Jenna thought about the tree, it didn't seem frightening at all. She knew this place, this old sycamore. Everybody called it the ghost tree. It was a place steeped in mystery and folklore. Jenna had spent happy hours there as a child. She would have laughed at her fears had the dream lasted only one night, but she had dreamt it 3 nights in a row. Each time she had to fight the vines even harder, and each morning she awoke exhausted. In the days following her father's death, Jenna's house was never empty. Family came, neighbors came, her mother's co-workers, Jenna's classmates, her father's friends. They filled every room. They brought cakes and covered dishes. They shared their stories, their memories of Charlie Ward, and when Jenna could take no more, she locked herself in her room. No one thought it the least bit odd, although they might not have understood the pleasure she got each time she walked into her room. Over the past few days, she had rearranged everything. Now every object on her dresser was carefully aligned. The bedspread was smooth and taut, not a single wrinkle. Every piece of clothing in her closet was neatly lined up by color, and every shoe was snuggled beside its mate in tidy rows. Each time she left her room, she inspected every inch to make sure nothing was out of place, and when she returned, the comfort she felt in finding such order was so intense she wanted to cry. Each and every object was always just as she'd left it. Nothing had changed. Perhaps the people downstairs might have thought this strange if they had seen her room only a few days earlier. Chaotic heaps of discarded dirty clothes, crusty plates, glasses gummy with dried soda, papers and open books tossed haphazardly in corners. But that room had belonged to another Jenna. They might have thought it unusual, too, that she spent many of those private hours after she'd retreated to her well-ordered sanctuary working on math problems. But Jenna couldn't have cared less what they thought. Math was her passion. She could never make those people downstairs understand that she found these equations more comforting than their sympathetic words and hugs. Solving math problems cleared her mind. It left no room for anything else. Equations produced only one correct answer. You either got it right or you didn't. There was no middle ground, no murky gray area to confuse you. On the morning of the funeral, her mother stood in Jenna's doorway staring at her daughter's attire. Her well-shaped eyebrows slid into a frown. "What?" Jenna smoothed her long skirt, then spread her hands palms up. She looked down at her heavy lace-up boots. It had rained all the previous day and most of the night. The grass at the cemetery would be wet, the ground muddy. The boots were a practical decision. Her mother, the queen of practicality, should have been able to see that. Jenna braced herself for an argument. But Meredith Ward, much to Jenna's surprise, simply shrugged and began absently brushing at a wrinkle in her skirt. She said nothing. Her own outfit was perfectly coordinated. Jenna noticed she wore high-heeled black patent leather shoes. The heels were sure to sink in the soft mud, throwing her mother off balance. The image of her mother suddenly tipping over in front of all those people made Jenna smile, while at the same time a wave of shame for even thinking such a thing on the day of her father's funeral washed over her, dampening her amusement. Jenna hiked up her skirt, put her foot on the bedspread, and double knotted the shoelace, trying to ignore her mother. Meredith Ward hovered in the doorway for another minute, although Jenna was no longer sure why. Then, much to her relief, her mother turned and headed downstairs. The rest of the morning was a blur. People she had never met, co-workers from her father's office, took her hand and whispered their muted words of sympathy. Close friends and family swarmed about her in the hot, sticky air until she thought she might suffocate. Overhead, the dark clouds rumbled and threatened, but the rain never came. And when it was time to leave, Jenna stared down at the casket in front of her and wondered again, for the 1000th time, what she was supposed to be feeling. On the hot July evenings that followed, while bees hovered lazily over the borders of the pink impatiens, Jenna lay in the hammock by the pool waiting for her father to come home from work. She would find herself doing this and then realize that it was not going to happen. Sometimes when she opened her eyes slowly, the shadows from the trees in the woods behind her house played tricks and made her believe she actually saw him. But on this particular night, just as the fireflies began to appear, the shadow that moved toward her from the wooded path turned out to be Andrea Sloane, her best friend. Andrea lived in the house behind Jenna's on the next street over. Their houses, like all of the homes on the block, were separated by a thick wooded area that spanned about 50 yards. Over the years, the two girls had worn a footpath between their two backyards. Andrea pulled an aluminum chair over to where Jenna lay in the hammock and sat down. She put her hand on the edge of the hammock and began to rock it back and forth, as if she were rocking a cradle. "Come to the pool with me tomorrow. I can get you a guest badge." Jenna folded her arms behind her head and stared up at the stars. "Why? We can swim here." "Yeah, but everybody else will be at the community pool." Jenna looked over at her friend. Andrea had let go of the side of the hammock and was tugging nervously at a tight ringlet of short dark hair. "I'd feel weird," Jenna told her. "Why?" "Well, everybody at the funeral, was being so nice. It gave me the creeps." "Yeah? So? You don't want them to feel bad about what happened to your dad?" Andrea looked confused. Jenna sighed. "It's not that. I just hate the idea of people feeling sorry for me." Andrea sat back and plunked her bare feet unceremoniously on Jenna's stomach, using it for a footrest. "I don't feel sorry for you," she said. "You don't?" "No. I think it really stinks what happened to your dad, but I don't feel sorry for you." She made a face. "That would be like pity or something. I don't do pity." Jenna laughed. "At least not very well, anyway." Andrea lowered her feet back to the ground. "Besides, Jason's coming home tonight, isn't he? So he'll probably be there." Jenna had had a crush on Jason Friedman since the 7th grade. Then, finally, in April, they had started going out. She had never been happier. Now, she realized with amazement that she hadn't even thought about him these past weeks. Jason and his family always spent part of July camping in Maine. It occurred to her that Jason probably didn't even know about her dad. How could he? His family had left before it had happened, and since his father always elected to go camping in remote places that had no phones or plumbing, insisting his family could live without television and newspaper for a few weeks, the chances of their having heard about the accident were practically nil. "Come on," Andrea coaxed. "It'll be fun." Jenna looked down at her bare feet and wiggled her toes. "I don't know. Maybe some other time." "Some other time? That's it?" Andrea reached over and pinched Jenna on the forearm. Jenna jumped. "Hey! I just wanted to make sure you were still alive." "Well, I am," Jenna snapped, "so you can keep your hands to yourself.